Okay, in today's video, we'll talk about variables and data types. But before we start, let's have a look at a basic anatomy of a program, right? So starting off with, we have our main file here, that is your Java file. It'll be called my program. So when you create the new file, it'll be called myprogram.java, and this entire thing will be the text file. Now, the class here, the class name, is the name that you give your program over here. Right? So your main program is going to be called my program. And then inside we have what's called the main method. And we'll talk about methods later on in a later video. But every single Java program that you want to execute must have a main program and a main method. And then this method will contain all of the different statements that your code will go in. Okay? So within this, let's talk about the concept of a variable. First of all, in order to talk about the variables, we want to look at some basic definitions. So let's start with that. First of all, a variable is basically a name that refers to a value that you use inside your program. Okay? A literal is the actual value that is directly written into code. And we'll see some examples of that later on. A declaration is something when you specify the name and the data type of a variable. And then an assignment is when you actually take a literal value and then store it into a variable. So you're assigning it to a variable. So let's look at an actual example here. Here we have 4 lines of code. We start off with, well, here's the variable. So the A and the B, these are variables, the variable names that you could define to store whatever value you want. Now, a few things to remember when you create a variable, you want to make sure that your name, first of all, starts with a lowercase letter. And secondly, use meaningful variable names. Don't use things like A and B like I did over here. Make it kind of useful for yourself so you know what's going on later on. Okay. Then literal are the actual numbers, the actual values. So the 12, the 2.3, these are all literals. And then when you look at this entire line over here in the second line, this is a declaration. So what we're saying is B is a variable with the data type of double. And we'll talk about what that means later as well. And then the assignment happens later on when you say B is equal to 2.3. So now B will hold the value of 2.3. Okay. One of the things that then come up is when we look at the declaration, what is this double or what is this int? And what are these data types? Okay. So data types are basically ways of defining what sort of value a variable will hold. Okay, so these are some basic data types that you'll come across. We have int, which basically stores integers. So your whole numbers, right? So like what you see on the top over here. You have your double, let me do a laser pointer. Double, which essentially are floating point numbers, in plain English, decimal numbers. So positive or negative decimal numbers are double data types. Booleans is a way for you to define a true or false. So these are truth values. And this is very simple. It only stores 2 different types of values, either true or false. And this is useful when you want to make decisions in your program. A char, or short for character, is your single characters. I'm actually missing a character over here. This is actually supposed to be a single quote. So whenever you have a single quote, there, that is a character data type. Okay, and this could be letters, this could be lowercase letters, actual special characters as well. Those are all work. Okay, so these are all character types. And then we have strings, which is a collection of characters. So these are your words and sentences. Okay, so this can be a collection of characters. You have spaces in there, spaces of character as well. And this is a string. Now, data types are also broken down into 2 different categories. The first one is called a primitive data type. Now, primitive data type is the basic building blocks in Java. So these are your numbers and your letters. They store kind of simple values directly in memory. So, integers, doubles, boolean, chars, these are all called primitive data types. These come out of the box with Java. The second is called an object data type. So object types are more complex. They store multiple values and also store methods together. And again, we'll talk about methods in more detail in later videos. So instead of holding the actual value or the actual data, they hold a reference, so an address to where the data is stored in memory. So a primitive data type actually stores values directly in memory. An object stores a reference to another memory address. And we'll talk about this later on as well, in terms of direct reference and a reference, memory reference. So a string is a object. Later on, when we talk about more complex data structures, we'll look at other objects as well. And you could also create your own objects, and we'll talk about those in later videos as well. So what happens in memory when a variable is created? All right, this is what's really interesting. So let's say, for example, I create a declaration. I say, I want an integer called myInt. Okay, so in memory, what Java would do is it'll actually reserve some space for my variable myInt. And the data type tells the program or tells Java how much memory to reserve for that data type. Then when I actually assign the value, right, let me make that 42, it'll then take that value and store it directly in the memory location that Java has reserved.